Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. Okay, remember I'm not gay, they're changing my voice. This video is about the marital rape controversy in France and the bills that they're discussing. Let's talk about the philosophy because it's easier to talk about the philosophy than the legality. So basically, it goes like this. They did a study and they found that about half of females said they were either forcibly raped by their partner or they were coerced. Now, part of the problem here is they're not putting it in categories, right? In the news clip that I saw. So, in other words, if somebody says, baby, please, and tries to get their wife or their girlfriend to have sex with them, they consider that coercion. That's a big mistake. That's a big mistake. That's basic negotiation. Now, if you're, say, Jesus, right, like I am, and you see my Proof on Christ playlist, by the way, and you were to say, hey, you're just supposed to submit to me, you'd be right, right? And you'd be right to divorce a female who rejects that argument. Because if she marries you and she commits to that and she says she's a Christian, she's supposed to submit to me. She's not doing her duty. So there's all kinds of situations where it is outrageous for a female to refuse her husband sex, okay? And this goes back to philosophy. So there's feminists who disagree, there's white supremacists and Jewish supremacists who disagree, and there's white supremacists and Jewish supremacists who agree. So things get a little tricky there. The ones who disagree, at least as their stated argument, they disagree because they want to control things, they want to create chaos, they want to keep a black man from exerting romantic power, sexual control over his female, especially if she's not black. Okay, because they the word rapist is like the word racist for a reason. They have a chip on their shoulder when it comes to this issue. There's LGBT people who want heterosexual relationships to fail so they can kind of play mentor. And you should all have noticed that big time by now. And there's people who don't want me to point that out because they want people to be too afraid of the LGBT sexual controllers to speak on it and to, take action and what have you. So as usual, I'm just kicking the ballistics here. No offense to anyone other than the offense that God intended. So when we look at this situation, it's a little more tricky than they present it. It's very simple. You have to pinpoint these things, and it requires having a moral order point of reference, because who should be exerting sexual power over who and to what degree and why? So, for example, I'm the most righteous person that ever will live when you use a universal scale. When you consider how tech, cheating, breeding, and generational ill-gotten gains rules out people in the future, and how righteous intensity makes someone more righteous than someone else, and who's more righteous than the top martial arts ever possible, gathering the spirit of righteousness with focused intensity, being able to outmaneuver everyone else's spirit. So my spirit, my essence, my being, my state of being, the righteousness that I've achieved, the degree goes beyond everyone else. But does that mean I would just go around saying, hey, I'm more righteous than you, than have sex? No, because that's not righteous. So how did I achieve that degree of righteousness? By not doing things like that. Okay, by standing firm through sabotage. They cause me to make minor mistakes here and there, but I'm being sabotaged to the extreme around the clock. So when you have that point of reference, you get that I'm right. Now imagine if someone was to say, well, they think that Martin Luther King is magically more righteous, or that, and I say magically so don't take me out of context. I'm not an occultist. I despise magic. The word magic is a play on words for for I'm cage, what have you. The letter scrambled I-M, and then the second word C-H-E, which is cage without the E, and also you can get gay and the second word C, and obviously I'm not gay, so on and so forth. If you have any questions about that, I'll put in the comments. So one might make the argument that Martin Luther King is magically more righteous than the most righteous person ever possible. And it's easy to disprove. Same with George Washington. In fact, let's disprove it real quickly here. So when we look at the Bible, and Martin Luther King was a Christian, right? He committed to that, which is him admitting himself with a universal scale, okay, that he is not as righteous as somebody who is a martial artist, whose arguments are more refined and better than his arguments, whether or not that person is famous or not. Because righteousness isn't a matter of causing the world to change. For example, the sun could be hot and you could go into a cave. That doesn't mean the sun is not hotter than, a fire that you light in the cave. So righteousness is a matter of conveying it. It's a matter of being in the spirit of it, and how righteous you are in the spirit of it, it makes you more righteous or less righteous than someone else. Okay, so the focused moral intensity of the top martial arts ever possible goes beyond the righteous intensity of Martin Luther King, assuming that he had righteous intensity and wasn't some kind of gimmick or something, to keep it very simple. And same thing with George Washington. He was just a mere feeble guy. There's nothing about him that was intensely righteous. He's just a politician. So as we look at the scales being used, it's very important we get this right. There's some people who are judges and police officers and politicians who feel like they need to exert power in a certain way, and that if people undermine their power, that that their life is reduced. Now, we all know that people don't respect the authority of politicians, generally speaking, police officers, generally speaking, for the most part at least, right? But yet they're still able to perform their duties. So we can immediately see that argument is rubbish. And that also helps you understand why it's so important and why it's an easy decision to focus on and to explain that there's a moral order in society. So in order to tackle the question of whether or not females should submit to their husband, we're talking about right and wrong. And therefore, we're talking about an order of morality. Okay? For example, should they submit to a little kid? No, because that's wrong. Okay? Should they marry a bad guy and shun a good guy? Okay? And then submit to him unconditionally? No, because that's wrong. So it goes back to the moral order. Who's good and who's bad, right? Good, better, great, and greatest. Okay, being good looking and being good. So as we connect these ideas, and if you have any confusion about this stuff, put in the comments. We see that it's open and shut in terms of, in order for us to tackle this argument, to get it correct, to nail it, we need to understand who is more righteous than who and why with the universal scale. And for those of you who want to enforce a Western scale, say, this is America. We don't care if we stole the land. We don't care if universal justice is greater. This is America. It's the white man's. Well, you want to take that very ignorant Neanderthal, ignorant, inbred-like stance because you're raised wrong, because you're some kind of low-stock idiot, some kind of filth, some kind of just complete imbecile. Think of it this way. Countless American kids, including white kids, have been sexually molested because you enforce that scale. The problems we're in right now is a result of America pushing white supremacy and not universal morality. White, Jew, and LGBT supremacy, token minority supremacy to whatever degree. That's how we got into this mess. That's why we're having this discussion in the first place, and it's not solved because they're responding to that. These people don't know how to respond to universal morality because it's very simple. Universal morality is right, and feminists who disagree with it are wrong, and it's very clear. But when you have two demons arguing over how it should be, it's not so clear. So there's a lot of confusion, and in the confusion, you see that people are used, confused, and abused as a result of the ruse. Any questions? Now, for some reason, I don't think that you people understand the situation here. People are being killed and poisoned and raped and exploited all the time because you're arguing about which immoral scale should be used instead of universal, pinpointed moral precision and a moral order that we understand because of the true concepts of universal, pinpointed moral precision and focused moral intensity. So I suggest you watch this video several times if you're confused. And please comment so we can discuss in the comments. I know you people probably won't, but that's the right thing to do. Because we're not discussing these things honestly, these things continue. There's no shortage of conversations that are taking place. They're on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and on, TikTok, on and on and on. They're on the news. They're having all kinds of conversations. And almost all of them are just pathetic conversations that just continue the problem, that just distract people. They create straw men, they oversimplify, they overgeneralize, they avoid the argument, they use all kinds of stupid tactics. They're gaslighting people left and right. It is pathetic. That's why the word illusion starts with the word ill. Okay, and the word hell rhymes with ill, rhyme and reason. They're raising hell by using illusion instead of truth. And who's really benefiting from it? Look at the rich. They don't look that happy. They're not even benefiting that much. And again, for the umpteenth time, I challenge the rich and their allies to debate on whether or not the plan that they have to reinforce the quote-unquote international rules-based order, is best for them and their offspring. I challenge them to do a debate on that. And they don't want to do it. They don't want to do it. And they certainly don't want to, televise it because they know I'm right. They know that it's not even best for them and their offspring, but they keep going because they've lost their minds. And I'm not saying this to make fun of them right now. Sometimes I get angry and I want them to feel the sting. But right now, like most of my videos, I want to solve the problem and as fast as possible.